Morning, welcome everybody. I am going to call to order the Transportation Committee for Friday, April 29th. I'm Jessica Hector-Sue from the RTA and the chair of the committee. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of April 1st, 2022, the determination has again been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, CMAP posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on their website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. Committee members, just a reminder to please state your name when you're making a motion or a second to help us out. And Mary is going to help us call the roll today. So Mary, go ahead and call the roll.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to call the agency name and member. If you are present as an alternate today, please state your name when your agency is called. So IDOT Office of Intermodal Project Implementation, Chuck Abraham.
Aye.
IEPA, Darwin Burkhart. Lake County, Kevin Carrier.
Good morning, present.
Metra, Lynette Saravella.
David Kralik for Lynette Savarella from Metro.
Okay, thank you. CTA, Michael Conley. McHenry County, John Paul Dipla.
Present.
FHWA, John Donovan.
Here.
CMAP, Terry Dixon.
Here.
FTA, Tony Greep.
Here.
RTA, Jessica Hector-Sue.
Here.
IDOT Office of Planning and Programming, Tom Kelso. If you just indicate in the chat if you're present.
Doug DeLilly is here also for Tom Kelso.
Perfect. Thank you, Doug. Kendall County, Heidi Lichtenberger.
Hi, present.
Will County, Christina Kopkowski.
Here.
Pace, Eric Llewellyn.
Here.
Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, Chris Hebert.
Here.
Cook County, Tara Orban.
Good morning, present.
Bike Ped Task Force, Jessica Ortega.
Here.
CNT, Heidi Prasad.
Good morning. Can I interrupt?
Hi, good morning. This is Heidi, present.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. IDOT District 1. I believe we have Steve Schilke here today.
Present. And we also have John Basic.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Kane County, Jackie Forbes. Council of Mayors, President Mike Einhorn. Universities, Joe Schofer.
Here.
CDOT, Big Krishnamurthy.
Morning, present. This is Vic.
DuPage County, Chris Schneider.
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Universities, PS Siraj.
Morning, I'm here.
Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission, Thomas Dow. MPC, Audrey Wenink.
I'm here.
And Tollway, Rocco Zucchero.
Good morning, present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I think Leah joined us as well from CTA.
Hi.
If you'd like to note that. Hi, Leah, welcome.
Thank you. I had a problem with getting into the meeting. It was giving me problems with our firewall. So.
Yeah, no problem. Glad you're here. All right, let's move on to agenda item 2, agenda changes and announcements. We don't have any agenda changes. I did want to announce that if audience members want to make a public comment during item 9, please indicate your desire to do so through the question box, and CMAP staff will help you do that. I also was going to announce that Thomas Dow is the new committee member representing Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. I don't think Thomas is here, so we'll be sure to welcome him when and if he does join us today. Does anybody else have any other announcements? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item 3, approval of minutes. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move DuPage County.
All right, we have a motion. Can we have a second?
Yeah, second, Lake County.
Thanks, Kevin. Any questions or comments on the minutes? No? All right, Mary, go ahead and take a vote.
All right, here we go again. IDOT Office of Intermodal Project Implementation, Chuck Abraham.
Aye.
IEPA, Darwin Burkhart. Lake County, Kevin Carrier.
Aye.
Metro, Lynette Saravella.
Aye.
Dave.
Oh, sorry, Dave. Yes, thank you. CTA, Leah Mooney.
Abstain.
McHenry County, John Paul Dipla.
Aye.
CMAP, Terry Dixon.
Aye.
RTA, Jessica Hector Sue.
Aye.
IDOT Office of Planning and Programming, Tom Kelso or Doug DeLille.
DeLilly, aye.
DeLilly, thank you. Kendall County, Heidi Lichtenberger.
Aye.
Got a little bit of feedback there. All right. Will County, Christina Kopkowski.
Aye.
Pace, Eric Llewellyn.
Aye.
Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, Chris Hebert.
Aye.
Cook County, Tara Orban.
Aye.
Bike Ped Task Force, Jessica Ortega.
Aye.
CNT, Heidi Prasad.
Aye.
And then IDOT District 1, Steve Schilke or John Basic. Oh, okay, perfect. There we go. I could hear that, John. Thank you. Kane County, Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Council of Mayors, President Mike Einhorn. Universities, Joe Schofer.
Yes.
Thank you. CDOT, Bid Krishnamurthy.
Aye.
DuPage County, Chris Schneider.
Aye.
Universities, PS Siraj.
Aye.
Northwest, we don't have anyone for that today. MPC, Audrey Wennick.
Aye.
And Tollway, Rocco Zucchero.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Motion carries. Let's go ahead and move on to item 4, CMAP board meeting updates. For this, we'll have Executive Director Alleman providing us an update. Off to you, Erin.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jessica. The CMAP board met in March, but not in April. So we took a pause. We didn't have any pressing business, and we were sort of on the cusp of understanding if it needed to be in person or not. So we delayed the meeting. But in March, we covered the 2050 plan, some of which the materials you've already seen here, some of which you'll continue to see today. We also discussed the mobility recovery project, which we're in the midst of, which is looking at land use decisions, where people live, are choosing to live, where people are businesses are choosing to locate, and how people are trying to how people are getting around these days, and trying to sort of get our arms around what does this future look like, and what would we need to adjust to address some of the changes that might stick around for a while. I wanted to take a moment here to introduce a new member of the CMAP team, Linda Mastandrea here. I don't know if she's on, I haven't scrolled through here, but one of the things that this committee had asked us to do over, is really look at safety and, sorry, was that Linda? No, okay. Was looking at safety and also ADA compliance as well. So we have been in the midst of developing a program here for the region, and Linda is our new ADA planning director and really will lead our program development and implementation around ADA and Title II compliance here. and a number of the local implementation activities around our safety action agenda as well here. So Linda brings a strong experience and expertise that will help us advance this work and achieve our ADA goals. She is a licensed attorney and most recently served as the director of the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination at the Federal Emergency Management Administration, so FEMA, where she was a principal advisor on issues impacting people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. She developed and implemented strategies to ensure the needs of people with disabilities were met across all of the agency programs, services, increasing agency capacity to serve people with disabilities through education, through training, and technical assistance. Linda also improved outreach and engagement to incorporate the needs of people with disabilities into planning, response, and recovery activities. So if that doesn't clearly articulate her experience and expertise that she's bringing to the region, I couldn't say more. We are thrilled to have her join the team. Again, her extensive experience interpreting laws and regulations and rules and analyzing policies and really being involved in implementation activities and procedures and programs is just so vast, and we are just excited. She's also really visionary, a strategic planner, a change agent, and has been a public spokesperson for accessibility issues through her role at FEMA. So again, we're excited to have her. Oh, there you are, Linda. Sorry, my notes were covering my page. Linda, do you want to say a few words to the committee?
Sure. Okay. I wasn't sure if I could unmute myself. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to say a few words. It is my huge pleasure to be here today and to be joining CMAP to build and to develop the ADA planning and compliance program. As Erin mentioned, I have significant experience in this arena, both personal and professional, and I'm really delighted that my work at FEMA over the last several years has sort of led to this. One of my keen interests at FEMA was the post-disaster rebuild of communities and making them inclusive and accessible and integrated, and so this very much dovetails nicely with that focus, and I'm really pleased, to be back home. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, and so pleased to be back home and really excited to get to know all of you and super eager to start this work, and happy to meet all of you at some point or to take any questions. I know you've got a busy agenda, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Linda? I've got a couple other things I wanted to touch on before we get into the rest of the agenda. I will share that if you or your organization has an ADA coordinator, I think that's one of the things that we would like to help set up is meetings for Linda to understand what you and your agencies are doing around these issues. I know that many of our counties do have ADA transition plans and are in a good spot, but understanding from you and your roles and your work where there might be additional opportunities for us to focus on in the counties or with our local communities here, I think would be a helpful background. So feel free, we will be reaching out, but if you want to proactively reach out too, and we can get you on the list to sit down with Linda and our team that'll be working on this. In addition, we're hiring a number of planners and planning positions to be able to support this team. So this work is really in addition to the work that we do through our local technical assistance planning team. And I'd be remiss seeing Audrey here, just recognizing that this work really came out of the Metropolitan Planning Council's Where the Sidewalk End report, and also Arlene, the division director of the Illinois Federal Highway Administration's office, pointing out that our region is not in compliance and it is a core responsibility of the MPO. So we're excited about this work. We know it's not going to happen overnight, but building the team and hitting the ground running here. So we talked to you in February a little bit about our internal strategic direction and its relationship to the Transportation Committee. We shared a recently created video that was used to help reorient our new Climate and Regional Economy Committee members. So in addition, at our previous meetings with you all, we have indicated that we know we need to align future working groups to address the needs coming out of the Illinois, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I see those two I's and think IL. But we have completed our first round of sort of assessing and figuring out what the highest needs are going to be coming out of that, and going to continue forward with a few working groups for specifically. So the working groups that kick us off will be a Complete Streets and Safe Streets working group to really look at active mobility, the new funding is set aside for the region that we have here for Complete Streets, and other competitive programs that'll be coming through the infrastructure bill and rolling out across the course of this year, and hopefully on an annual basis for the next 5 years. The Transportation Technology and Operations Coalition to address congestion, mitigation, technology innovations, and competitive opportunities in that space as well. The Freight Working Group is going to help us deal with freight mitigation and operations, and then the Safety Resource Group to address our safety action agenda needs and those items that have been strengthened in the new legislation as well. So each of these groups will have a subject matter assigned to them. So we anticipate that this is not completely inclusive of all of the resource groups that we'll need to convene, but just the place where we think we should start, just given the signals that we've been getting about the infrastructure bill and what might be rolling out first here. For just your knowledge too, I think you'll see a lot of the expert staff that we've seen over the years participate in these issue areas, but we'll be reaching out. And if you do have a specific interest in any of those issues and aren't currently involved, please do let us know, and we'd be happy to make sure that you're aware of when these groups start convening. Today, Yusuf will be presenting a little bit more details on the regionally significant projects update. A little bit later on the agenda, we'll be asking the committee for a recommendation to the MPO that the RSPs be put out for public comment. I just wanted to provide a little bit of framing at the beginning of the agenda before you get started here. So, you know, because we are only taking a minor update to the 2050 plan, we continue to use the same regionally significant project definitions that we used under the 2050 plan. So many of the projects that you'll see on the RSP lists were included in Onto 2050. Let's see, staff estimate that there's about $485 billion in core revenues available over the planning horizon from 2023 to 2050, versus a need of about $429 billion just to maintain and operate the system in its current condition, which leaves about 55, sorry if I said million, I meant to say billion, 55 billion or 11% to be split between reaching a state of good repair, enhancing and expanding the transportation system. This highly constrained environment, while there are new revenues through the infrastructure bill, that doesn't mean that we have unlimited resources to add new projects to our plan. So we really, you know, look to you all as our experts in helping us understand sort of the trade-offs between projects, policies, and recommendations. So with that, I am happy to take any questions, but otherwise we can go on to the next agenda item.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for the overview. Does anybody have any questions for Erin about any of those things? No questions? All right, thanks, Erin. Let's go ahead and move on to items for approval. We only have one item for approval today, which is the federal fiscal year 2019 to 2024 TIP amendments and administrative modifications. For this, I believe we'll have Russell giving us an overview. Russell.
All right. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 121 TIP changes contained in formal TIP Amendment 22-05 and the 226 TIP changes contained in Administrative Amendments 22-05.1 and 22-05.2. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in an increase of $566 million in total project costs for all prior, current, and future years. Nearly half of the formal amendments are transit projects, 63 of them. Of particular note are 53 Metro projects. CMAP, FTA, and the transit agencies have been discussing ways to improve transit project information in the ETIP database. The changes reflected on the amendment reflect not just cost changes, but other changes such as better project descriptions and linkages to RTA capital budget documents. Updating all transit projects in the ETIP database will be a sustained effort, so we should anticipate more transit projects on future amendments. Administrative amendments only added $11.5 million to the TIP in all prior, current, and future years. The net change for the total cost in the TIP from all amendments resulted in $577.5 million being added to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. As shown in the memo, changes in funding sources and cost changes comprise most of the formal changes. Administrative amendments were more evenly distributed amongst AC and ACC changes and schedule changes. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on April 22nd for committee and public review. Approval of formal tip amendment 22-05 is requested, and I can answer any questions if there are any at this time.
Thanks, Russell. Does anybody have any questions for Russell on the amendments?
Can I ask a question? It's Rocco
Sure, go
Tolway.
ahead.
Is it 2205 or 2204?
I believe it's 2205.
The memo,
Yeah, it says
I just want
2205.
to make sure we vote on the right thing. It's the memo I thought says 2204. Anybody else see that, or just me reading an old one?
The one I clicked on today says 2205.
Okay.
So let's try to vote on 2205, and I think we've already done 2204 at the last meeting, so 2205 should be the current one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the minutes from the February meeting are for 2204.
Okay. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah,
So
it's
maybe it came up in the packet because it was in the minutes from the last time.
Yeah, gotcha. That's what it was. Sorry.
got it.
No, it's a good question. Means
No
you're reading.
problem.
We're paying
Always good to
attention.
know what you're voting on. Always better to check first, Rocco. Any other questions for Russell? No, it's exciting to see some of those improvements that we were working toward in terms of information. So glad that you were able to highlight that for us. All right, I'll take a motion to approve tip amendment 22-05.
Tara Orban, so moved.
Thank you, Tara. We have a second. I think I saw Kevin second it. Let's go ahead and take the roll call, Mary.
All right, I'm just going to do names this time. So Chuck Abraham.
Aye.
Kevin Carrier,
Aye.
Lynette Saravella.
David Kralik for Lynette Severilla. Aye.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you, David. Leah Mooney.
Aye.
John Paul Diepla,
Aye.
Terry Dixon,
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue,
Aye.
Doug DeLilly,
Aye.
Heidi Lichtenberger,
Aye.
Christina Kopkowski,
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
Chris Hebert,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
Aye.
Jessica Ortega,
Aye.
Heidi Prasad.
Aye.
For IDOT District 1, do we have a vote from either Steve Schilke or John Basic? All right, thank you. Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Joe Schofer,
Aye.
Sid Krishnamurthy,
Aye.
Chris Schneider,
Aye.
P.S. Siraj,
Aye.
Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
and Rocco Zucchero.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mary. The motion carries. Let's go ahead and move on to information items. We have 2 information items today. We're going to start with Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act update from Laura. Back
Great.
to you, Laura.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks to everybody for letting me take a few minutes to talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I'm just going to call IIJA as we're discussing it today. Obviously, this is something we'll probably be having lots of conversations with you over the course of the next few years. But I think it's just something we wanted to touch base to tell you a little bit how we're moving forward in this space. So we can go to the next slide. Since we last met, we've continued to think about and prepare for the regional implementation of this bill, like constantly. That includes reviewing the bill for policy and programmatic changes, as well as preparing for the new eligibilities and the increased funding on our regional programs, and thinking about how do we best coordinate and prioritize around all of the new competitive opportunities in the bill. All right, next slide. The staff is going to continue to spend time this year really reviewing the bill and implementing all the federal rules and changes so that we make sure we're meeting all of the requirements, sharing the analysis with our partners on those policy changes, and really trying to look at our work to better align with the intentions and the opportunities that are created by these policy changes. The infrastructure bill does make direct changes to authorizing language that impacts MPOs, and we're already making those changes within our budget and work plan to make sure that we meet, again, all of those regulations. So looking more about implementing the policy changes, wanted to just kind of bring to light, and I know we've mentioned this a lot of different ways, but want to make sure we're, again, all on the same page of one of the new changes is that the 2.5% of planning funds needs to be set aside for the complete streets work and planning. With the increase that we're expecting in the region, this really lets us allocate more than $715,000 to new region-wide complete streets planning work. We're in the early stages of setting this program up, but we can tell you, as Aaron mentioned earlier, this will build on the work of the safety action agenda, and it will act as another tool for the region to improve travel safety and targeting specifically vulnerable road users like bicyclists, pedestrians, and those accessing transit. And again, Aaron mentioned earlier today that the Safe and Complete Streets Working Group that we will be establishing will definitely be working in close proximity to this work as well. I also just want to note that the bill adds new language for CMAP and MPOs to coordinate housing, transportation, and economic development better. We're currently working with our federal associations on the authorization language for that. So we still have some information we need to be getting through Congress to really understand if we can have better flexibility to use our planning funds to enhance the work we've already been doing around housing. So going forward, there's still a lot of guidance that we need, literally final guidance from the federal government in order to capture what the work is that we can be doing, but we're watching that and making sure that that becomes part of our transportation planning process. Thinking about the regional formula funds and eligibilities, we've used the time in between the bill passing and these programs actually being funded, which only happened last month, to really review how the formula programs work and how we want to administer those in this region. Next slide. So this includes eligibility and funding for all three of our core regional programs: surface transportation, congestion mitigation, and transportation alternatives. There is new eligibility under the surface transportation program for EV charging, cybersecurity, ITS, and resilience. So that's one of the changes. The CMAC program saw eligibility clarified around things like micro-mobility, bike share, and purchasing of zero-emission vehicles. The TAP sees the project eligibility explicitly expanded to emphasize safety projects that address those vulnerable users and allows for the state's highway safety program funds as a local match. It's also important to note that the IIJA increases are being incorporated into our program marks going forward, whether that's local marks or the statewide marks. Both of those are impacted by the eligibilities. And we're also trying to keep an eye on the guidance because, again, once that comes through from the federal government and that's released to our federal and state partners, we will make additional changes as needed in that space. So moving on to the new formula programs, the guidance for the carbon reduction program was released just last week and includes new funding and eligibilities to address emissions and transportation, like a CMAQ 2.0. Illinois is estimated to receive $43 million in this funding for the first year. And as the MPO, we are required to work with the state in development of a carbon reduction strategy by November of 2023. We are still awaiting guidance on the PROTECT program from US DOT, but we expect it will come soon now that they've given us the carbon reduction guidelines. And that program supports resilience-focused projects that will incorporate natural infrastructure, flood protection, and other improvements. And Illinois is estimated to receive about $49 million of this for this program in the first year. Because these issues are already important to us, we've already started work on these programs prior to even the bill being passed. We have begun work and actually just finished a series of workshops for a regional transportation vulnerability assessment, which will be adapted into what the bill calls for as a resilience improvement plan. So under PROTECT, the creation of the resilience improvement plan allows projects to get a higher federal share. Certain projects get 80 to 90% federal share. So again, work we want to continue. Additionally, the electrical vehicle formula money from the state be flowing once the state submits an infrastructure deployment plan, and they have until August 1st to do that. Again, this is something that we had already begun work on here at CMAP. We hosted more than 30 individuals from government agencies, community organizations, and businesses for a virtual workshop because we really think it's critical that we have a sustainable and equitable charging network that helps all of the residents in our region have access to EVs. And again, we'll be looking again as we get more guidance from the federal government on that program. And lastly, just thinking about, go back to the reaching our climate, the last slide, there, thank you. So I think as these programs roll out and we get guidance, we want to be thinking about how do we reach our climate mobility goals that we laid out in 2050, utilizing some of these programs. So fortunately, the policy goals in the IIJA align with the principles and goals identified in 2050, especially those at the intersection of climate and mobility. So to execute on our commitment to implement on to 2050, this bill delivers a tremendous opportunity to take a critical step towards rethinking how we can more efficiently use our transportation funding to implement projects and execute on those goals, specifically through CMAQ, TAP, carbon reduction, and protect. It's a portfolio of funding sources. So staff is exploring how we might do this better, and we look forward to coming back to you soon with options and avenues that we can carefully target the resources to maximize benefits, just like the 2050 principle calls for. So stay tuned, we'll be back very soon to talk some more about this. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about how we're coordinating access around the competitive programs. I know there's a lot of shiny balls out there with those competitive programs. Everybody's real interested to see what's going to happen.
Laura,
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? I saw Leah raise her hand.
Oh, yeah.
That was related to.
I can wait till the end. I just had a quick question about the 90-10 split for the resiliency with the resiliency improvement plan. Does that just apply to the protect funds, or is that for other formula funds as well, if we have that in place?
So it's specifically for the projects that you would be funding through your resilience plan. So if you have a resiliency plan and they say these are the projects, then you can get a higher federal share, but it's specifically for those projects in that program. Perfect. There's other ones that have higher federal share, and we can pull those for you, but it's not all projects.
Thanks, Laura.
Sure. So, and yeah, again, happy to take questions now or later through any of this, and if I can't answer them, we'll get back to you. There is a lot in the bill, so we're trying to get through it and commit it to memory. So I want to talk a little bit about the consensus building. I mean, earlier this month, USDOT did release a broad schedule of when they think some of those competitive programs are going to be released, starting in May. That was in addition to the latest round of the RAISE grants that was closed. There's currently an open call for the infra and mega projects. So it's still pretty rough, but at least it gives us an idea of when some of the programs will be coming through and helps us think about how we want to approach that. Next slide. The list of competitive opportunities that they provided was about 14 grant opportunities, and we're really trying to think through how best we can help this region be as competitive as possible for those opportunities. I think first and foremost, a priority for us and our planning staff is working intentionally, focusing on equitable access for our capacity constrained communities to access those opportunities, whether that's grant training, aligning the community opportunities with the most accessible and competitive pots of funding for those projects. So from the get-go, we want to be working with a community so that they are able to access these projects. One of the first opportunities that's coming in May is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program that would provide funding for the comprehensive safety action plans for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So we know that that's coming. We want to get the information out. So in addition to broadcasting the opportunities in our weekly newsletters, committees, working groups, our local government network, we will also be looking at how to make what the most competitive approaches are to that program for the region. Again, we don't want to be competing against each other, and because we're really competing around the rest of the country. And so it's really important that we work together. even just looking at the RAISE, MEGA, and infra alone, that's $4 billion worth of funding in regional projects. And to be able, we want to be able to be as competitive as possible and not lose out on those opportunities. So as an MPO, again, we'll be working with all of you to work to convene, prioritize, build consensus around applications. And we will also be working on a longer term strategy for aligning our projects and our project requests with these larger competitive pots of funding so that we're meeting the intent of the bill, intent of our 2050 planning principles, and really effectively putting our best foot forward for these competitive pots of funding. Again, happy to answer any questions about the bill, but know that we'll be working with you consistently as we move forward on this bill implementation.
Thanks, Laura. It's always a whirlwind when you provide us updates about this. There is a lot in there and a lot for us to follow, so we appreciate that CMAP is keeping your ear to the ground and sharing with us all that you're hearing and seeing there. Anybody have questions for Laura? Leah, yeah, go ahead.
One more, because it is a whirlwind. Do you mind going back just a few slides to the first of the formula fund ones? I'm trying to sort of take good notes here. And okay, so thank you.
Yeah, so again, for the core programs, it's really having new eligibility. So the program itself and the funding increases, but there's new projects that would be eligible for those funds.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for going back there too.
And again, I think as we get new guidance, we can share those all. Again, we can push the guidance out to you guys too, so that you can see the different details once the programs are established.
Yeah, that's helpful. Leah, did you have a specific question, or you just wanted to see this a little bit more? Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to catch up. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
It's been a long week.
Yeah, that it has. Anyone else have questions for Laura?
Jessica, Chris Snyder, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So if you can go back one slide, I noticed under TAP, the reference to actually, if I'm reading this right, the last sentence, you can match federal with federal, that we're allowed to use the HISP safety funds as matched to TAP for the expanded eligibility. Am I reading that correct?
Yes, I think that a lot of the intention was that the highway, I think everyone recognizes we have the highway safety issue, and we're trying to, the intent was to try to, one, address that issue in a better way and use federal funds in a better way to do it. And then the other intent was that the HSIP funding is actually a source that I think a lot of states struggle with getting out the door. We just shared some information in our newsletter about opportunities there. So I think that that's a way for the government to really leverage their dollars to really hit that critical point.
I mean, that's great. The only thing I want to mention is that the HISP call is now, and then TAP is next year. So are we going to be in this cyclical thing where they're never going to be aligned, And so we may want to think about in the next cycle to maybe marry those two, the timing, so we can take advantage of that potential to match TAP with HISP.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point, because again, when we're talking about that portfolio of those 4 projects, that is so much of the difficulty of when the bill passed, when how the project eligibility and the open calls happen, and actually trying to be able to utilize those funds. So that is a lot of what we're trying to marry up in that, to bring back to you guys, of like, how do we do this better so that things are better aligned? Because we're kind of retroactively having to look at this since the the timing of the bill passage, and then again the guidance. So that's a great point. We'll continue to work on that with you guys.
Yeah, that was a great point. Thanks, Chris.
And a quick question too, Jessica.
Sure, go ahead.
Just kind of back to Leah's question, and then the local match for like having a resiliency plan. We may not know this yet, but I seem to recall CMAP, or we were kind of talking about prior to the region having a resiliency plan is that something that would come out of that, or do each, should we be preparing as agencies to kind of have our own resiliency plan too? Or I thought there were some talks about trying to leverage like the region's resiliency plan to help out with that local match.
So that is our hope, is that the vulnerability assessment, which we just did the scoping workshops for, will turn into a full assessment, will turn into the resiliency plan for the region. And so that we would actually be able to have the projects in that resiliency plan at a regional level, and that would inform the projects that could get that match. So that is the trajectory that we're trying to use that information for.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Kevin. Also a good question. Anyone else have questions for Laura? No other questions? Okay, thanks, Laura. Let's go ahead and move on to 602 on to 2050 update. Update on the update. For this, we have Yusuf. Yusuf.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Happy Friday. I'm here to share a progress report on the update to the ONTO 2050 regional plan. Before doing so, I want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the tireless efforts of our CMAP team members who worked and continue to work on the plan update. I think it's important to note that as we've journeyed through this process, we've learned a great deal about our existing processes and opportunities to improve upon it. And it has, I believe, has strengthened our passion, our pursuit of equity, our need to collaborate, our desire to foster innovation, and our commitment to excellence. That being said, I'll now share our ONTO 2050 update progress report. Next slide. The ONTO 2050 plan, as you all know, is our region's comprehensive and regional transportation plan. It was adopted in October of 2018. A lot has changed since that time, but even with those changes, we've learned from nearly 4 years of research and heard from talking with more than 100,000 people across our region that the values continue to resonate as we continue to move forward. This includes our 3 principles of the ONTO 2050 plan of inclusive growth, resilience, and prioritized investment. Next slide. The plan update provides an opportunity to reaffirm the vision of the ONTO 2050 by exploring these principles and their continued value in our current context. Additionally, it allows CMAP and its stakeholders, all of you, to adjust projections for the future, to review and celebrate accomplishments that we've achieved over the last 4 years, but also to reassess transportation needs in our region. Next slide. Our plan update work is undertaken through the multi-year development of 10 separate but interlocking planning activities, as you can see on your screen. These activities are all still in progress, and our teams are aiming to finalize them in the weeks ahead. Today, I'll be providing a preliminary review of the financial plan and the regionally significant projects. However, before moving on to those discussions, I'll touch upon future milestones and the respective timing of them. Next slide. As you can see, moving from left to right, earlier this year, we began the process of assessing regionally significant projects and at the same time providing a draft package to the board. Here we are now in the month of April. We've conducted roundtables. We're continuing to work on the plan appendices, as I mentioned earlier. And here we are today at the TC meeting to provide an update. Moving forward, at the June Transportation Committee meeting, we'll be sharing a draft plan with all of you and seeking your recommendation that the MPO release the update for public comment. The public comment will take place over the summer, and at the September Transportation Committee meeting, we will share a summary of the public comments and any related changes with you. And subsequently asking for final approval for both the board and the MPO in the joint meeting in October. I'll now move forward with the discussion of the financial plan. Next slide.
Yusuf, sorry to interrupt you, but your audio is kind of going in and out. So just you might want to adjust for a second before continuing.
Okay. Can you hear me better right now, or is it still the same?
That's better.
My apologies. In the financial plan update for transportation, CMAP lays out the anticipated future costs and resources available for the next 27 years, that's leading us up to 2050, to fund our transportation system in our region. This activity assesses the sources and uses of approximately $485 billion in transportation system funding. Because we are a fairly built out region, our transportation system is simply massive. Northeastern Illinois is home to over 3,200 miles of expressway, 18,000 lane miles of arterial and collector roads, over 35,000 miles of local roads, over 15,000 miles of sidewalks, and 1,300 miles of regional trails. That's not to mention that we also operate one of the largest transit systems in the entire country. Given the maturity of the system in our region, we must prioritize additional funding sources for modernization and maintenance of our transit system to be safe and reliable as we all hope, while we're also preparing for future mobility influenced by new data, communication technology, private mobility services, and increasingly multimodal trips. The financial plan for transportation prioritizes how the region will use the anticipated transportation funds between now and 2050, including how much will go to operating, improving, and enhancing the current system compared to expanding it. As you can see by the slide that may be in front of you, almost 96.5% of the $485 billion in funding is going to operating, maintaining, and improving our existing system. That is compared to only 3.5% that is going to new capacity. Next slide. So speaking of improving, enhancing, and adding new capacity, I just want to break those numbers down just a little bit for you on this next slide. You'll notice that these investments are focused on improving safety on the region's roadways, which has been a critical focus of state, federal, and local transportation agencies for decades, while also improving travel times and accessibility for all users across all platforms of our transportation system. Within the improvements and enhancement buckets, you'll notice that approximately $43.6 billion is dedicated to transit projects, and $30.2 billion is dedicated to road and bridge projects. Under the new capacity bucket, you'll notice that $10.2 billion is dedicated to transit and approximately $7 billion dedicated to roads and bridges. In both cases, we are looking at more investment in both our transit systems when it comes to improvements and enhancements and new capacity. Next slide. So just to break down just a little bit of how this money is being spent and when it's being spent and where it's being spent. When you look at our list of regionally significant projects, as I'll be discussing in the next slides, approximately 48% of our regionally significant transit projects are planned for construction in the next 5 years. So the money that we do have allocated to transit is getting spent in the immediate future, whereas 31% of road projects are expected to begin construction by 2027. I think this provides our region and our partners a tremendous opportunity to be involved in the planning process for those respective road projects with our implementers to see how we could improve the outcomes of those projects while also mitigating any of the consequences that may result of those projects to our environment. Some of the projects that will be slated for construction in the next 5 years also include the Blue Line Forest Park Reconstruction Project, the North Red Purple Line Modernization Project, as well as projects at the South Lakefront Museum Campus for their accessibility improvements, as well as roadway and pathway improvements. So speaking of the RSP projects and the process, that will guide me to my next section of the presentation. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the regionally significant project definition. Regionally significant projects are capital projects in the region's expressways, transit system, arterials that have impacts and benefits that are large enough to warrant additional discussion through the regional planning process. These include large reconstruction projects as well as additions to the system. The definition for RSPs, as you see on the slide before you, was approved through our committee structure nearly 4 years ago. I also want to just also reference that there are important projects that do not meet this RSP threshold, but note that many of these projects throughout our region are nonetheless important to consider for funding and implementation. This includes a wide variety of projects like intersection improvements, bike and pedestrian trails, accessibility improvements, transit facility improvements, and safety countermeasures that help make progress towards a seamless and multimodal system. For instance, priorities for regional bicycle trails that are featured in the Northeastern Illinois Greenways and Trails Plan and as adopted by the 2050 plan envisions a network of continuous greenway and trail corridors linked across jurisdictions, providing scenic beauty, natural habitat, and recreational and transportation opportunities. Since 2013, CMAP has been using the Northeastern Illinois Regional Greenways and Trail Plans to guide funding decisions for the Transportation Alternatives Program. The current Transportation Alternatives Program is putting nearly $46 million into 31 bike and pedestrian projects across our region. And I'll add to that, that since 2009, our regional implementers have constructed over 1,350 miles of regional trails throughout our region, with additional miles of trails programmed for future funding in the aforementioned Transportation Alternatives Program and the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program. Next slide. So now that brings us to the RSP process. This planning exercise was kicked off in the summer of 2021 and was intended to be a status update. Therefore, to identify candidate projects, CMAP connected with implementing agencies to confirm information on existing RSPs and to discuss any potential new ones that they may have or ones that they may want removed. That outreach took place during the summer of 2021 and followed up with continued outreach through the fall and the winter. Next slide. As a result of those communications with our implementers, 74 projects were submitted during this process. Of those 74 projects, there were 13 newly submitted projects, 12 of which were on the constrained list, and one was placed on our unconstrained list. That includes the Metro Milwaukee Corridor Improvement Project. 3 projects that were previously constrained were not resubmitted, and a list of projects that were already under construction were not evaluated. And that includes the Jane Bird Interchange Construction Project, the Red North Purple Line Modernization Phase 1 project. All existing projects, then be it the new ones and the ones that we carried over, were evaluated using the same evaluation criteria from 2019. Next slide. The evaluation of each project focused on the same metrics and measures that were established for OnTo 2050 through our committee structure and include addressing current needs, improving 2050 travel, and the degree to which each project fits the OnTo 2050 planning priorities. Evaluation results are detailed in the preliminary draft of the RSP benefits reports that was shared with you prior to this meeting. We still have a lot of work to do on the document, and we look forward to completing this exercise in the weeks ahead. In closing, I'd like to say thank you to all of our implementers for working with us during this RSP process, and I'd like to thank them for continuing to operate the massive system that I previously mentioned earlier. We look forward to working collaboratively with you on our plan update as we move forward. If any of the committee members have any questions, myself and the CMAP team are here to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Yusuf. I appreciate that overview. I know we've had a couple of meetings this week to talk through the RSPs, and our team's still looking through the memo, and I'm sure we'll look forward to having many conversations with you over the next few weeks about that list. Do we have any questions for Yusuf from the committee? Audrey, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I had some comments, so not exactly a question, that I wanted to share about the list as we've been looking over the list and the benefits that were shared a couple days ago. So bear with me. I have a number of points I wanted to make. So as I was hearing Erin give us some of our introductory comments, she used the word trade-offs, and I think it's really important that this group be thinking about the trade-offs given that we have such a small amount of money for enhancements and capacity improvements. The Metropolitan Planning Council, in looking at the list of regionally significant projects, recognizes that the list signals the values and the priorities of the region for billions of dollars of public investment, and we do not feel the list reflects the goals of inclusive growth, resilience, and prioritized investment. In particular, we're concerned about the large number of road widenings on the list and their impact on induced demand, resulting in increases in vehicle miles traveled. We calculated 122 additional lane miles of interstates and 55 miles of functional class 2 and 3 roadways. We used a new state highway induced frequency of travel, the SHIFT calculator, developed by a couple of very well-respected national organizations, which generated an induced demand anticipated of a 1.1 billion additional vehicle miles traveled per year and 7.7 million tons of direct CO2 emissions by 2050. And we just are reflecting on the fact that just last year, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus released its Regional Climate Action Plan, which was developed in partnership with our federal environmental agencies like NOAA, and lists reduction in vehicle miles traveled as a core climate strategy. So this proposed level of roadway expansion runs counter to the goals. Laura just presented onto 2050 climate goal as mitigating climate change. So this just seems like a conflict. And given that we are in such an intense crisis, waiting 4 more years to make changes and in the next update just seems too long to wait. I'll also highlight that the Federal Highway Administration has put out guidance recently about the bipartisan infrastructure law that is very clear that we should be prioritizing projects that move people and freight by modernizing and increasing the operational efficiency of existing roads over projects that expand general purpose capacity of roads and highways. So that's from the federal government specifically about how we spend our funds. We also know from an equity perspective, CMAP's May 3rd memo on the financial plan notes that the overall cost of driving is a burden for households with low income. And this acknowledges that the investing in infrastructure that requires ownership of a car is not consistent with equity goals. We appreciate that CMAP really pushed themselves to give us benefits before this meeting at our request. And we see that the greenhouse gas calculations do not appear to incorporate induced demand. For nearly every road widening project, the calculations show a reduction in greenhouse gases, and we know that's related to speed calculations, but we feel there's a fatal flaw here in terms of the way project benefits are calculated. We also know that with the arterials, a number of planning factors that were identified in the memo do not have results calculated for them, which include greenhouse gases, development pressure on conservation areas, development pressure in areas at risk of groundwater saturation, impervious area, and support for infill development. Those are important goals, and we need to know the results of those calculations as we evaluate these projects. It's also unclear if a project receiving weak scores in these calculations would not be able to advance. Most of the measures are converted into an index of 1 to 100, so the projects submitted are compared against each other, not against discrete thresholds that would indicate a project sufficiently advancing goals. In addition, as we talk about the priorities of ADA, which we were just talking about earlier in this meeting, and we're so pleased that CMAP is focusing and has new staff working on ADA issues, but it's just not really clear from the finance memo. Everything's bundled under enhancements, and it's not clear what those enhancements will be. You know, the dollar value for enhancements, does that mean that we will get all our transit stations up to ADA compliance? it doesn't give specificity. Additionally, it doesn't give specificity for the amount of bicycle and pedestrian investments that are assumed there. We struggle with the RSP criteria in that they're oriented around a definition of congestion, and they're only on NHS roadways. And there's historically been no way to add capacity along these roadways in our modeling processes for bicycle and pedestrian projects. So these projects are evaluated solely on the ability to add capacity via lane widenings. And so we really feel that we need to know the full range of capacity alternatives, including transit, biking, and walking, before considering roadway capacity. Similarly, with pedestrian and bicycle urgency, it was noted earlier in this conversation how the Northeastern Illinois Regional Greenways and Trails Plan is being used to prioritize some of the federal projects. But we'd like to know if the dollars that are assigned in this in the financial plan, will that build out that whole plan, that whole set of projects? There seems to need to be a way to know that we're building out our networks and how much we're going to be accomplishing with the dollars that we're spending. In terms of maintenance burden, I will just also mention CMAP has done some great work in the past couple of years looking at municipal pavement management plans, and they show that communities can't even maintain the roadways they have now. I realize this is a different scale than RSPs on the NHS system, but it's worth noting that we need to account for the maintenance of the entire transportation system, and communities right now look like they cannot maintain their system. It does seem like we would be better off from a resource management standpoint if we didn't expand roads, but put those resources in projects that enable more person throughput along existing corridors and support active and low emissions modes and improve traffic safety, given the absolute crisis we're having with crashes and fatalities. And then finally, I will say we were also concerned that there was no public process for suggesting projects during this cycle. I think it's becoming more widely recognized how planning processes often do not engage the public in defining their needs and desired transportation solutions. And by only asking project sponsors what they think should be built, we're missing out on hearing from a broader public about what the future of transportation investment should be. So thanks for bearing with me with that long list of comments. And thanks for considering them.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey, for all of those insights and for sharing all of that. Yusuf or Aaron, do you want to respond at all? No.
You know, I'm happy to weigh in a little bit here. I think one of the things that we have been focused on is understanding what the shifts in our economic realities and our transportation realities are right now, and understanding what tools we need to better define the projects that are moving forward. I will say in a region like ours, where we have a highly built out expressway system and system of freight and goods movements, we know that there are very exacting places across our region where congestion builds, where lanes go from 4 to 3 lanes. We also recognize too that we have lots of transit needs that can come along and be beneficial to these things too. But I think some of the things from our mobility work that I think will rise to the surface here are just that buses are a really great tool that we have in our region to be able to move people and get them to the places that they need to go. And so they are more cost effective. Again, you know, we recognize that we don't have sort of the refined level of tools that we might need to analyze the projects that will be used in a meaningful way, but that's on our to-do list for the 2060 plan. In addition, one of the other things too, you know, I know the people focus is really important, but as we think about our economy here, one of our biggest economic strengths is our freight and goods movement. And so making sure that we are continuing to be competitive and that we don't lose those jobs and industries to states that are a little bit warmer than us due to just the condition of our system today. So we recognize that there are lots of things that we want to do, but transportation infrastructure projects have a long lead time. And so we do have lots of things that are in the pipeline that our implementers have been working on for quite some time here. So Yusuf, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So Audrey, listen, I want to thank you and the Metropolitan Planning Council for providing those very well thought out comments. I wrote down a couple of notes as you were talking. I think on just on the more immediate, you mentioned perhaps getting some financial figures on just how much money specifically was going to certain asset classes. I think that's something that we can certainly carve out from the expenditure plan and be able to provide those in greater detail. So I'm happy to work with you and others on sharing those specific details. I think it was mentioned just a couple months back at our special February Transportation Committee meeting, how the agency in of itself is looking at developing new tools to assess the impacts of our transportation projects on our region, be it whether they're equity impacts, economic impacts, health and safety impacts, as well as environmental impacts. And that's a tool that we are still deliberating at this moment in time and look to be working on going forward. So I think that you mentioned that here at this Transportation Committee meeting in the past, and that's something that we'll continue to be working on and collaborating with our partners going forward. And as we continue to move forward to finalizing our RSP benefits report, we'll certainly be firming up some of the data sets.
Yes, we're losing you. We're losing your audio there.
All right, I don't. Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay, I don't know how the audio is getting distorted, so I do apologize for that. I don't know how much of what I said you've missed, so I do apologize. But I think I'll just sort of mention what I just mentioned in the last few moments, is that as we continue moving forward in the weeks to come, we'll be firming up our RSP benefits report and the data contained in that, I think, and that will help paint a much firmer picture of the results of the projects that in themselves. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Yusuf, for that. A question related to this for Aaron and Yusuf. Some of what Audrey is suggesting, I think, are some policy changes in the way we think about RSPs. What I'm hearing you say is that, practically speaking, that's not going to happen right now because of where you are in the RSP process and where implementers are in building those. When is the right time to have that conversation? And when do you see taking us to that point where this committee can really dig into some of those policy questions and have more conversation about it?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I mean, essentially, we're in the process of a minor update. We aren't changing the policies of 2050. Many of the plans and projects that are included in this regionally significant project list are the projects that were approved alongside the 2050 plan for, well, 3 years ago. So because this plan is due in October, we've taken sort of the approach of we're not really sure what the future is going to look like, and that's really where projects like our mobility recovery project are going to help us redefine what the policies, the practices, the things we should be investing in our region, kicking off into the 2060 plan process. In addition, Yusuf and his team are working on developing a more refined project evaluation tool. Again, I think we look at some of these broad things as Audrey identified, right? And it's hard to compare apples and oranges, whether you're talking about transit. The bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is critically important, but in terms of cost and scale and economics, it's just much smaller when you're looking at some of these big projects like the Jane Byrne Circle Interchange. I'm going to pick something that's already done. So again, having sort of a refined method, they tested a new thing when they went in and developed the 2050 plan. We set new thresholds for what makes a regionally significant plan, and part of that was in response to the 2040 plan. When we created regionally significant projects, it was these big visionary, you'll remember, I think many of you, there was the West Loop Transportation Center, right, but didn't really have a project sponsor. And but the Circle Interchange wasn't in there too, and it ended up being something that came into the process a little bit later. So by setting some clear dollar thresholds, I think the team thought that would help us capture some of these bigger projects that weren't necessarily on the long-term horizon. We've seen, again, maybe we need to be someplace in the middle where we're taking a look at just more people-focused approach to our infrastructure and not sort of what the scale is. But again, that process will be kicking off and is sort of starting and underway through our mobility recovery research project that we have on going right now, through the tool that I think will be going out for assistance with in developing in the next fiscal year as well. And then there will be other things on the horizon that will help support us being able to understand these projects and impacts better.
Got it. Thanks. Thanks, Erin. We look forward to having those conversations and seeing more about those projects. Any other questions for Yusuf or comments? Leah, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. So I was listening along to all of this, and a lot of the things that I was thinking about were addressed, and so thank you for that, everybody that spoke already. I just had a few other sort of things to offer as I was looking at this list of, the new projects and kind of what came on, and thinking about adding roadway capacity. And, I'm thinking about it not just through a CTA lens, but through, a participant in this region, and what that means for, our sort of long-term grappling with climate change and climate mitigation. I think, it's tricky because with these RSP updates, as Erin said, these are sort of interim updates, and at least from CTA's perspective, not a whole lot changed. We did a lot of refinements of stuff, but I do think that part of what we're seeing is just that things are sort of coming into being that are being made at sort of a more local level, decisions made at a local level, that I think it's tricky to have a lot of sort of higher level regional involvement in a lot of those detailed decisions. I think that could be really challenging in terms of bogging that down. And so how do we evaluate those things, those sort of localized decisions within that broader picture? And a lot of it gets to more sort of the de facto, how funding is split in the region, and what kinds of funding sources are available, and how those funding sources are then programmed locally. I think it's tricky because some of the local programming is very appropriate, and there are decisions that are made at a local level that should be made at a local level. But then if they do have these broader impacts in terms of inducing additional travel, inducing through that additional greenhouse gases, they do then have that regional impact. So what's the appropriate role for CMAP is sort of what I've been thinking about, and I'm sure you guys have been too. Maybe a few thoughts to offer. I think from CTA's perspective, we have a lot of, all of our programs that are in the TIP end up in our CIP, end up in the RTA CIP, and we have that regional coordination there for our projects. And we are broadly sort of more regionally based, right? We're not just in one municipality. And there was some discussion also earlier about sort of aligning the ETIP and the RTA CIP to make sure that that's clear and transparent, make sure that people can understand what's going on in each of these places. And I know I'm talking a lot, but so let me get to my point. Looking at the financial plan and thinking about this as a constrained environment, there is a lot going on in that financial plan, and there are a lot of different sources and a lot of different uses. And I don't know personally to what degree all of the funding sources are constrained in terms of what they can be spent on. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about, sort of value capture for transit, and that piece is there. But if we think about sort of the resulting, we have this global plan, we have these RSPs, but then the funding sources are kind of directed more locally, and those decisions are made at a local level. I think there is kind of a mismatch there. And then the other piece of it that we need to consider as a region and as a committee is if we're missing some metrics in terms of the induced demand, right? So if we're only giving ourselves credit when we add capacity to a roadway, if we're only giving ourselves credit for freeing up congestion, and congestion is so problematic because it's something that we think about sort of just being a negative, right? And we think about that being something that stops cars, and then there's more NOx and more particulates emitted as cars are sitting there idling. But if we also are thinking about it from the other lens, that as you free up the capacity, then you are potentially inducing demand, increasing VMT and increasing greenhouse gases, well, then we're not looking at the full picture, as Audrey said. So there may be some other tools in the toolbox that are worth exploring over the next several years. And then, you know, thinking about it from our own look at RSPs, as we were doing that for On to 2050, there were some places where we wanted to have more system-wide type projects like ASAP, I think the other one was, you know, some of the bus improvements that are more global or system-wide. And really the RSPs were focused on on corridors, right? And on specific parts of the system. So I think that's an area that we can look at in the future as well. But in general, I think these are really great questions. And it's really, I think, going to be useful to think about what is the role of CMAP in this, and what is the role of TC in evaluating this, and how do we bring clarity to some of these decisions too that do have a regional impact, but are, again, they're more a local decision based on the funding that's available to that local area.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Leah, for those comments, and Jessica, if you don't mind. I think one of the things that, you know, we constantly are balancing, and then I'd love to hear from maybe a county partner, so I'm planting a seed for your thoughts, Kevin. But, you know, when I drive to Joliet, right, to go to meetings, there just isn't a better option. And I get that there could be a better option, but throughout the course of the Mobility Recovery Project, I've been checking in with the local mayors and trying to understand what the local capacity is and interest is in some of these things. And, you know, I heard a lot of comments from folks that, you know, buses are for poor people. And I don't see my local community people hopping on the bus to get the places that they need to go, because it doesn't work the same way as it does in our urbanized, highly effective, highly walkable areas, you know. And sort of another thing that I learned from my days at the state DOT is, like, once you get outside of the area where there is good transit service, it's just not easy to get around. And it's through sort of, you know, maybe a lack of coordinated land use and transportation planning, but my mother-in-law wants to live in a rural area, and therefore she knows that her option is going to be driving. And so, again, I recognize that all of these things have these cascading impacts, but the realities of being in other parts of our region are just as real. And so I think it would be nice to think that we could serve everyone in a more meaningful way, but how can we as a region identify maybe how could we better serve people to employment, right? 60% of the jobs across our region will never be able to be done from home on a computer screen. And so I think that maybe the opportunity for us is really focusing in on a couple of these areas where we could have a meaningful impact in spending our transportation dollars, but that the uniqueness of every situation in every community and every county, just there isn't one sort of thing that we can't do, but we can drive climate goals by identifying a range of options that then our counties and municipalities can take on themselves in different ways to help us adjust and meet those goals. But Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to share with?
Yeah, I can certainly jump in too, and I think it's a great discussion to have. And I'd like to start off by saying that we, you know, just, you know, Lake County DOT, I mean, we align with a lot of the stuff that, you know, Audrey, you're saying. I mean, you know, when we're selecting projects, you know, I think a majority of ours, similar to this program here, are modernization and preservation type projects. 10% or just under 10% of our program is non-motorized, which is, you know, larger regional bike paths and things like that. We have an SOV, single occupied vehicle reduction study that we're working on. So shameless plug here, that'll hopefully be rolling out with some recommendations maybe early next year. But so we are looking at those things. But to, you know, kind of Aaron's point too, just, you know, framing it as, I think, region across the region, I mean, it's hard to do a one size fits all when you look at our characteristics in Lake County or some of the other suburban counties. Just, you know, even in Cook County or Chicago, you know, the needs are just different. And we, you know, my father-in-law is the same. He chose to drive from the northwest part of the county to the southwest part of the county, and that was his choice to drive, you know, 20 plus miles every day to work. But, you know, our population has grown from the 90s till today from 400,000 to 700,000. And we have a lot of the same 2-lane arterial roads that were built in the 1930s too. So I think it's targeted, and it's trying to think about where are the right places to do that, and to do some of those widening, bottleneck eliminations, grade separations, things like that. They can get cars moving and also have a positive effect. on the emissions. So I think as we think about this over the next couple of years, just thinking about that, and if there's other data, if we aren't capturing the greenhouse gas emissions or induced demand and stuff like that, certainly I think if there's a way to get the models to do that and to capture that, that it helps us all make informed decisions. But we certainly have a need. So a lot of the projects that are on this RSP list or some of the state, those arterials that are on our state consensus list that have been priorities, just to these old, almost 100-year-old corridors that need to be widened and improved, and that a lot of those include bike paths and things like that too. So just county perspective too, just trying to think of the region as a whole. What works in one corner of the region may not work in the other too. So.
Yeah, and just to build on what you said, Kevin, I agree. I mean, in terms of the city of Chicago and Cook County, just given the adjacent land use, the densities, that we have here, before, I think, yes, we need to optimize and look more critically at, like you said, evaluating transit, biking, and walking, Audrey. But there is a place, I think, that, it is a more nuanced discussion in terms of where, an ad lane could be bottleneck elimination, but what does that roadway do? Who does it serve? Does it support freight? Does it support mobility? So I think that, looking at some of those other factors in our decision making are critically important, particularly in, the collar counties. So thank you for bringing, these points to our, attention, and I look forward to continued conversation on this.
Thanks for all those thoughts. Sriraj, do you have something to add as well?
Yes, and this is a fascinating discussion, and I know that everyone's heart is in the right place, and I understand that CMAP and every other governmental entity out there is kind of constrained by what they can or cannot do, and also understand that land use and transportation are so intricately woven together, and understand that public participation, public outreach is not such an easy thing to accomplish. But you have to start somewhere, and it's easy for me to say this, but it'll be a lot difficult for you guys to act on it. But it has to start with education, in my opinion, educating the public about what, Erin, you just talked about the bus being the ones that are being used by the poor people. That's a perception issue. And so if we really get in the weeds on how this can be changed, then you start with addressing that perception about modal bias, about how people look at different things. The change is not going to happen tomorrow. But if we are consistently together, right from the smallest level of government to the biggest one, if there is a hierarchy, everyone should be singing the same song. Everyone should be putting in money to educating the public, to communicating to them why certain things are being done, why some things will have a bad impact, such as an induced demand, such as externalities from automobile. Unless we educate the public, I don't think the public outreach will have any impact whatsoever. So we've been doing this, we've been talking about it. I understand that the funding streams are constrained. There is all these model silos, but how do we make the change happen, given that we all understand what the impacts are going to be for the long-term future? So that's my 2 cents in terms of where do we start? We start with educating the public. How do we do it? I do not know.
Can I add to the professor's comments?
Sure.
Well, Professor, I think I have a few ideas on how to do that. So perhaps we can have a discussion on that. But just I think in my presentation, in an earlier slide, I discussed the breakdown of the projects happening within the next 5 years and those that are happening beyond that time frame, and noted that I think that provides us with a significant opportunity to potentially play a role in the planning process with our implementers. So just sort of adding to the comments that were just made, I think that runway exists of having an education to our general public about the effects of the decisions that we would make on our transportation system. I think once that education is certainly rolled out, then there's an opportunity for us to have a meaningful participation process in the planning of those projects, given the considerable runways that we have for those projects leading up to construction. So I just want to make that one point. The other point, Leah, that I think you made is a very good point around the funding situation. And I just want to just sort of state it as a fact, for an example. You look at the state motor fuel tax, for instance. It has recently increased from the last onto 2050 plan from $15.6 billion to estimated $43 billion going forward. That's a result of the motor vehicle fuel tax moving from 19 cents to 39.2 cents, and then 21.5 cents for diesel, up to 46 cents per diesel. What's interesting to note about all of this is the breakdown of that revenue. 45% of those revenues, or $19.3 billion, is stated for state road construction and maintenance projects. Only 9.6 of that, $9.7 billion of that is forecasted to be received by the RTA. And then $16.2 billion of that is distributed to counties, townships, and municipalities, and those can be used for all sorts of different transportation projects. But in a sense, of that $43 billion in anticipated revenue, only 9.7 of it is really dedicated at this particular point in time to transit. Not to say that the other 16.2 going to our counties, townships, and municipalities won't be, but at this particular point, you can see, at least from dedicated, only 9 versus approximately $19 billion is the split between road projects and transit projects. So I just wanted to state that to kind of come to your point, Leah, just to provide some facts on that. Is there is a bit of a funding mismatch, I think, or profile that may not be aligned with the comments that were provided earlier here. So I just wanted to highlight that as an example. And I thank you very much for bringing that up, Leah. It's a very, very good point and worth discussion going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey.
Jessica, this is Heidi Prasad with CNT.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
I just quickly wanted to say thank Audrey and Leah and Suraj. I think they brought up very great comments. And something I did want to add was that I think after reviewing the report, I would have felt more comfortable even deciding whether or not to vote on something like this when it does come up, is if I was a little bit more clear on the evaluation measures. So Yusuf, I appreciate you saying that you guys are going to kind of take a look at that again and kind of ramp that up with more information. I think specifically also when we're talking about using equity as a measure due to the Onto 2050 principles, the most important factor here becomes your economically disconnected areas. And so truly understanding how these projects are impacting the residents of those areas and how it's being used to weight projects. I couldn't quite tell what the ranking was, but I felt like maybe that should hold more weight, especially if equity, sustainability seem to be our more emerging topics. But thank you, that's all.
Thanks, Heidi. Yes, thanks for bringing up the equity question and how to both lean into that for the existing measures and also start to think about that for the future. Very important. Do we have any other thoughts?
This is Rocco. I just have to, having implemented a lot of projects over the last several years, and a lot of these that are on the RSPs, I just feel like I need to point a few things out. Yusuf, thank you very much for your overview and actually spurring this discussion, because I think it's really important, and it's great to hear all the different opinions and thoughts on this. We look forward to continuing to collaborate and work with CMAP and the regional partners on implementation. That's what we're here for, is implementation. I think we also need to understand is that we've got aging infrastructure. I think that's something that's got to get fixed. Our roadways, our rails, they have to get fixed. So when you're out there doing whatever work it may be, you got to break things down all the way down to the ground to rebuild something. So when you put it back, I think there's a responsibility as implementing agencies is to put it back the right way and address some of these problems. And there are capacity problems on the roads. You're right about the bicycle pedestrian accommodations. There's just a lack all over the place of that transit accommodation. So that's, when you break the road down, I could speak to roads, interstates as well. It's an opportunity to put things back the right way. But there's a lot of different users that need to be captured. I know what we're seeing on the tollway, and it's across the region. Commercial and freight traffic is just growing tremendously right now. you can't discount that, because we all want everything from UPS, from Amazon, from FedEx. We all want our things, but all those things get here some way, whether it be roads or rails, airports. I mean, we're seeing this growth, and and how do you move these goods around? And then you have the interface of the commercial vehicles with pedestrians and passenger cars. So there's another safety element that has to be considered, that takes up footprint, that takes up space, that has to be considered with how you implement the projects. But I really think we really need to take a hard look about with respect to freight, where we want it, the mix of traffic and the safety elements of that. I mean, just the freight is what keeps this region alive, always has, always will. That's who we are. That's what we are. We've got rails, we've got airports, we've got interstates. We are one of that, very dynamic region as far as that goes. I have to say this also, as an implementing agency, I thank CMAP for all the work that you have done over the years. You've pointed us through the role that you play in the planning process. You've pointed out where on our projects where we could and should implement transit, the bike and pedestrian accommodations. Where I see there's an opportunity for us to implement or put something into our project, absolutely, we should do it once and do it right. So I've always used that information. Your green infrastructure plan, the greenways plans, that's what I've always used for looking where we should put our mitigation, what other things that we could do as part of our project. So when we complete our project and walk away, we're walking away with something that we could all be proud of. So it's the foundational work that you do at CMAP. I just want to make sure you understand this, because it's so helpful when it's used the right way. It helps us do a better job of implementing, because these are they're big projects that we all have to do. These RSPs, that's why we're talking about it, because they are big projects. But there's a lot of things that we need to consider, and how things move around in the through the suburbs and the exurbs, because that's what is that we're responsible for. So we got to think about the dynamics of the entire region as you have this discussion, as evaluate these projects. I'm not advocating for one thing or another. I'm just speaking from reality of what it really takes to implement, and how you have to face the customer who is ultimately using your piece of infrastructure. When your work is done and you've spent a lot of money, did you put it back the right way? And how come you didn't do something that could have made it better for all users of the system, not just special users of the system? So, but I do appreciate the work that you've always done at CMAP. It helps us tremendously. I needed to say that multiple times, because we've done a lot of great things, because you've led us to those opportunities and the partners. So
yeah, thank you.
Hey, Jessica, this is John. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry. Who was that?
This is John Basic.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I was trying to get that earlier, but regardless, just to follow on Rock's points, as well as everybody's, you guys have all made really, really.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt you, John, but we're actually having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Would you mind trying adjusting your audio for a minute and trying again?
How about this? Does this sound better?
A little bit.
All right, I'll try to speak closer to the microphone. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody as well, and just kind of summarize as well some of the issues that IDOT kind of deals with, and maybe some of our direction going forward, which I think is reflective of some of the the thoughts and comments that we had. Certainly IDOT is primarily focused on maintaining the existing system, and that's the vast majority, really close to 7% of our funding goes to just maintaining what we have, reconstructing these 100-year-old facilities that have been mentioned, just providing that and rebuilding that. But as Rocco brought up, breaking down the roadways gives us an opportunity to rebuild them in a new way. We have a very robust public involvement process. We involve a lot of you folks on this call in our studies and our planning. So we are, in fact, inclusive of all the needs and travel, issues that come up. We have a complete street policy, and we are working as hard as we can to accommodate and incorporate things that support transit. We have bus on shoulder projects. Almost all of our expressways are going to be able to be designed for accommodate bus on shoulders. If that's something that, while bus not be popular in some areas, we are trying to make it something that can grow. Because there are areas that are further out that don't have those bus facilities, and it's not maybe popular yet, but if we're doing things, when we're rebuilding our roads, making improvements to accommodate them, it's going to do things to make our region better, facilitate those types of things. Even, again, I may have mentioned earlier, all of our road projects, whenever we do a major project, we are accommodating bikes and pedestrians, and we even removed some of the financial obstacles of that program with recently enacted legislation that basically doesn't require any local bus participation in any of those facilities when they're warranted. So we are working hard. We are partners. We're willing to, and not willing, we are seeking your participation and partnerships on all the things that we do going forward. And so as has been noted, that we've got opportunities to continue to build on these partnerships and continue to do things that meet the long range goals of the region. So that's all I wanted to comment on. And so thanks.
Jessica, if I may, John, you were breaking up a little bit, but I did try and write down some of the key highlights. So just for public transparency, I want to just reiterate, you mentioned that IDOT's highly focused on maintaining our existing infrastructure, that there's a lot of reconstruction that's happening, but that, the district is and the state is focused on thinking about new ways as you rebuild to build in sort of the sidewalk, the pedestrian infrastructure, and committed to advancing the local match for communities. But that there's a lot of, and the complete streets policy that you also mentioned, but that I think one of the other themes was just willing to partner and make sure that there's engagement on state projects in a meaningful way. I think those were the highlights. You were a little bit garbled, but feel free to chat us or send us a message and we can get the rest of that on the record here. I think one of the things that I think some of the comments that the implementers have been making today and thinking specifically about what CMAP's role is, right, is that we want to provide the foundational information that can help our implementers make better decisions that are taking us towards that path of 2050 implementation, and that we're helping solve creative problems at the same time and supporting the engagement that needs to happen. And I know how challenging it can be to sort of have big principles that we want to achieve as a region, but then when you as an implementer go out, the public may not be ready for that. So Sriraj, your comments about the public engagement and getting the public ready, and what sort of role does the regional agency need to play in making sure that they're prepared to understand why a bike lane makes sense, or why pedestrian access makes sense, or how we can think about these bus connections in a more meaningful way coming off 294, right? So I want you all, when you see me coming, you're like, Erin's going to ask us, where's the pedestrian access? I better think about it, right? But I also want to be able to incent that with the programs and the dollars that we manage here. And I want to be able to measure it so that you too can explain the benefits to your public and your constituents and your elected officials, and provide that support that I think is necessary for us to get there. So, I'm inspired by this conversation. I know we aren't perfect as an organization, but I do think the opportunity right now is that we've been given an opportunity through the infrastructure bill, the increases in revenues, to really make transformational change. And I hear it in your comments, no matter where you're from, that you want to be able to do that, and we want to be able to support you in doing that. So,
thanks, Erin. Yeah, just one more thing to add to that before we go ahead and move on. I also appreciate all the conversation. I let the conversation continue on partly because I think we need to have these conversations. And actually, this is one of the few forums where we get to do that and actually talk across modes, across parts of the region, across freight and passenger movement. And I think it's really important that we all kind of take the time to understand each other and understand that the way that we in our constituency, the world is not the way that the whole region necessarily sees the world. We're all one, but we're not all one. So I think I'm glad we had this conversation. I hope we continue it. I encourage all of you to read the memo and engage with CMAP between now and June when they come back to us for a vote. I also encourage you to engage in our RTA strategic planning process, where we're having a lot of these conversations just about the transit space, not obviously the whole region, or not across modes quite in the same way as CMAP, but all these processes are going on, the recovery work that CMAP's doing. There are lots of forums for talking about these things, so please do engage in them. And thanks again for the good conversation. So let's go ahead and move on to agenda item 7, legislative update. For this, we have Laura. Again.
Great. I'll talk about something easier, state legislation. No, just kidding. I do actually want to talk about state legislation. I wanted to make sure that we just touch base with you. Again, many of you I know are following the same things that we're following that was happening in Springfield this year, but wanted to just make sure everybody was aware of them, and a few other things that maybe you aren't aware of, but that touch CMAP's work. So again, as you know, the Illinois General Assembly adjourned on April 9th after passing the budget implementation, and a tax relief package. The package, again, has many things that impact our work and your work with our government partners. As most of you know, the General Assembly passed legislation that requested CMAP work with RTA to develop, well, maybe not requested, said that CMAP and RTA have to work together to submit a report of recommendations to the state suggesting potential changes to the recovery ratio, sales tax, governance, fare structure, and other items for financial viability of the region's public transit system. The report also asks us to address racial equity, climate change, economic development, and public engagement led by CMAP. We are both required to have this adopted by the policy committee and delivered to the state by the beginning of 2024, so us realistically by the end of 2023. I've joked with Jessica and her staff, we might just all move into the old post office, bring our sleeping bags to get this done in time. But it is something we've already started coordinating on between the mobility recovery work, RTA's strategic plan, and then again, there'll be more things that we have to deal with. But that is definitely going to be something that we are going to be focused on in the next 18 months. So I want to make sure everybody was aware of that. Obviously, you've all been following the 6-month temporary suspension of the inflationary increase of the state motor fuel tax. Begins on July 1st and goes through December 31st of 2022. So many of us worked to try to get the increase in the gas tax, as well as the inflationary increase as well. And while the state was able to make us whole in that, I think it's something Aaron just spoke about at City Club, and obviously important to us is that that's not something we want to see happen again, and that we don't want these short-term changes to have long-term impacts. If we did an analysis that if that freeze had been compounded over time, the result could have been $1.5 billion lost in transportation funding. And so that isn't a precedent that we want to be seeing going forward. And not a surprise for what we would be talking to our state legislators about. Another piece of legislation that impacted local governments exempted local governments from the GATA requirements for awards, including the capital appropriated funds made by IDOT to local governments for transportation projects. And so that was another thing of note that we were following. 2 pieces of legislation that were approved would allow IDOT and the tollway and counties to pursue design, build, delivery method to expedite project delivery process. Currently, IDOT uses the design, build, project delivery, where the department designs the plans in-house, then reviews bids from contractors, and this would expedite the process by allowing a single entity to both design and start construction of the project. So another piece of legislation we were following. On a slightly different space, we had our fees, fines, and fares report out last year. And so in positive news, the state's earned income tax credit was increased from 18 to 20% and expanded to include eligible taxpayers between 18 and 25 and people over the age of 65 that would otherwise not qualify, which was actually a recommendation in the fees, fines, and fares report. We had said that increasing and expanding the tax credit would help be a strategy for mitigating against the regressiveness of the fees, fines, and fares. So we were excited to see some of those recommendations actually moving forward. For local governments, there was two kind of pieces of legislation that we were following. The local government distributive fund was increased slightly, and we've all tripped over this, 6.06% to 6.16%. We've advocated for years for this to go up to 10%. So it's a slight change, but again, a move in the right direction. And then the other piece I just wanted to note is that there was legislation that looked at consolidation, requiring any tax living body outside of municipalities and counties to form a committee to look at efficiencies and consolidation. So another piece that's a governance in our governance part of the 2050 plan. There's a lot of other legislation that we're following and other pieces, and if people have questions, please let us know. I have to take this opportunity to say that our staff, after Anthony and Gordon's departure, did a great job trying to close out the General Assembly session and review bills and follow this. I'm very thankful to them. And that we have a new senior in the government affairs space that's going to be joining, that will be doing some of our state work like Anthony did. Her name's Kasha Hart, and she's coming to us from the MPO in Boston. So very aware of our issues and what we need to be talking to our partners about. And she'll be joining us in mid-May, so you'll see her at the next TC meeting. That's it for me, unless there's questions.
Thanks, Laura. Any questions for Laura on the legislative update? No. All right. Thank you, Laura. Let's go ahead and move on to item 8, other business. Do we have any other business from committee members that you'd like to bring forward? No. All right. Seeing none, let's go ahead and go on to public comment. This is an opportunity for comments from the members of the audience. If you have comments and you're in.
I'm so sorry. I was late in raising my hand for a additional committee.
Oh, sure. No problem. Back to item 8. Go ahead. Go ahead, Leah.
I wanted to highlight something I think that ties back to our earlier conversation on local decision making and trade-offs and how to pursue some of the sustainable investments. And so CTA and CDOT together are partnering on a Better Streets for Buses plan. And this is really a framework, and it does a little bit of what Professor Sriraj was talking about in terms of trying to both educate people and take public comment on the value of bus priority. And that's up right now. We have a betterstreetsforbuses.com website. So a lot of this is going to be virtual. There are meetings listed there. And there's a bunch of ways to engage, including a map where you can drop pins to say where you think there should be bus priority or where you think there shouldn't, if you want to add that comment. And there's also a toolbox of treatments. So we'll be looking at not just sort of applying those treatments to specific corridors or streets in this phase, but looking at what those treatments are, and then in future phases we would be applying those to streets. And this is really important because I think it's an important first step in rolling out more bus priority in the near future. And that also gets to the issue of, how do you make bus attractive? And as we're trying to get people to get out of single occupant vehicles and free up road space, as we sort of grapple with some of the issues of increased freight traffic too, getting more people into more efficient modes is important, and making that attractive is a key part of that. So I hope that you'll help us spread the word on that and take a look at it yourselves. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Leah. Yes, that is very prescient to the conversation we were having. So I'm glad that you reminded everybody about that. Okay, go ahead and move on to item 9, public comment. If anybody has a comment, please indicate so in the chat, and CMAP staff will elevate you so that you can speak. Kim, I believe we have at least one public comment.
We have 2. Yep, we've got okay. Kyle Whitehead is teed up to give his comments, and then Garland Armstrong also would like to give a comment after Kyle.
And okay. Jessica, we also have Rick Harnish who would like to make a comment.
Okay, 3. Okay, let's go ahead and have Kyle get us started.
Hey everybody, can you all hear me?
We can, yes.
Excellent. So I am Kyle Whitehead, the Managing Director of Public Affairs for the Active Transportation Alliance. I'm here to read some comments from a coalition of advocacy groups. So I just want to start off by reading the groups that I'm representing here. So in addition to Active Trans, it's the Center for Neighborhood Technology, the Climate Reality Project, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, the Shared Use Mobility Center, the Illinois Environmental Council, Illinois PIRG, the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club, NRDC, and the Respiratory Health Association. It's been a really rich conversation on this issue of the regionally significant project list today, and wanted to add some thoughts from our perspective. So we are in a really critical moment for the future of the Chicago area's transportation network. There's a wealth of federal and state funds that provide opportunity to transform our streets and improve quality of life in communities across the region. We're excited about the potential for the updates to the regional plan to result in progress on our shared safety, equity, and sustainability goals. This will not happen, however, if CMAP takes a business as usual approach with this update and advances projects that increase emissions and make our streets less safe for everyone. The current list of new regionally significant projects includes a troubling number of arterial widening proposals. It is well documented how recent spikes in traffic crashes, serious injuries, and fatalities can be attributed to safety issues on these arterial streets. These streets already divide communities and are unsafe and uncomfortable for people walking and biking. Widening them only makes these problems worse while encouraging more people to drive and increasing emissions. Evidence shows adding lanes to expressways and arterials does not result in long-term congestion relief for people driving, because any new capacity is quickly filled up by additional cars and trucks, leading to more emissions. CMAP's current scoring criteria fail to account for this reality. In fact, projects that add new lanes to expressways are shown to reduce emissions because of supposed increases in speed. For individual projects that add lanes to arterials, emissions impacts are not considered at all. I think that's a really important point. I would love to see, we would love to see some before and after for some of these arterial widening projects that have been done in the past that show the types of positive impacts we're talking about in terms of freight movement and safety. To the extent that modeling is being used at all, we really feel like the modeling is flawed and needs to be reevaluated. In On to 2050, we as a region are committed to creating a modern multimodal transportation system that reduces greenhouse gas emissions and doubles transit ridership from 2018 levels. Adding 122 additional lane miles of interstates and 55 lane miles of arterials, as this list would do according to analysis by NPC, is entirely inconsistent with this goal. To improve safety, equity, and sustainability, we need to make it easier for people to drive less, not fund projects that make it easier for them to drive more. These arterial widening projects are often framed as multimodal projects and awarded complete streets points from CMAP because they include enhanced painted crossings for people walking or marked shared lanes for people biking. This approach is flawed because it fails to acknowledge the negative effects of more car and truck traffic on people on foot and people on bikes. Any incremental benefits from additional paint are quickly washed out by longer pedestrian crossing distances and more high-speed, dangerous traffic. CMAP needs to develop a better way to evaluate and score these projects that fully accounts for their long-term impacts. Factors beyond vehicle speed and free-flowing traffic must be more effectively measured and factored into funding decisions, particularly safety, equity, and sustainability. We urge you to remove the widening projects from this list to allow more time to fully evaluate their potential impact on the region's safety, climate, and equity goals. This is consistent with guidance from the Federal Highway Administration calling for states to use new federal funds to prioritize projects that fix existing infrastructure and support multimodal travel above projects that expand road capacity. CMAP should work with partners to explore new US DOT tools to support agencies flexing highway funds to projects that better deliver on safety, accessibility, and connectivity goals. CMAP staff should update and improve evaluation and scoring criteria to better reflect the long-term costs and effects of each project. Committees like this one should be provided with more information and analysis before being asked to weigh in on whether these projects should be prioritized for funding. This list features more of the same widening and resurfacing projects while doing little to change the fundamental flaws in our transportation network. From both an equity perspective and a sustainability dimension, persisting on this course would be a tragic missed opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you to you and to the others that signed on to the letter for taking the time to submit that. And Kim, I believe we received that as a letter and that will be distributed or made available to the committee. Is that true?
Yes, we'll attach. Yep, we can attach that letter as part of the minutes and send it to the committee members as well.
Great, thank you. Garland, would you like to make a comment as well?
Yes,
Garland,
can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can now. Yep.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everybody. I'm Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, now living in Des Moines, Iowa, and I just want to thank y'all for getting the People's Mover at O'Hare finally running 24/7 after so many years since y'all been advocating to try and say when they're finally going to open it up, and they finally did it. And just want to thank y'all and making sure that the ADA will have access to it, so when they're coming into town and they would like to know where they can catch a Pace bus in the Metro, so that it won't be a lot of confusion, and also making sure for the visually impaired and the hard of hearing so that they'll get access to it also. And I'm very thrilled that y'all finally got the ADA coordinator to come join the CMAP staff. It's definitely, we need it so we can all work together. And when Pace have their next Chicago ADA meeting in their board meeting, I think the representative from CMAP should be at the ADA advisory board meeting in Chicago and listening into what for the Chicago part, and when they have a joint committee meeting at the post office there too. So that she should join in too, because so Pace can see how they can work it out. And it will be great also too, because it's definitely need to, so she can see firsthand what the Chicago area transportation system looks like in the 6 county area. And also too, I'm also concerned about like individuals in the further out, especially on the Metro part, when they have freight trains stopping at different stations like inbound part, and there are some that there's no ramps or no elevators to find out when is the next train's going to be on which platform. I think those cities like Elmhurst and Glen Ellen and Wheaton to make sure that when is the next train will be boarding, so not only the general public but for individuals with disabilities to make sure which side the train is going to be on so they can get over. And I think they need to work, either get a ramp or an elevator so that they'll get access to it when they board their next train, and don't have to be waiting an hour or two, because I'm really deeply concerned about that. So making sure that it'll work out.
Yeah, thank you so much for that feedback. Thanks for the shout out to the city on the airport shuttle train, and to CMAP for their new staff, and then those insights as well. We appreciate that. Thanks, Garland.
All right.
We also take care out in Iowa. We also have, I think Rick Harnish wanted to make a comment as well. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, yeah, I'm Rick Harnish. I'm the executive director of the High Speed Rail Alliance. We're a nonprofit advocating for fast, frequent, and affordable trains of many different types. You know, there was a long discussion about the current process to establishing the priorities for high dollar projects. I have to admit, I don't really understand that process, but it's pretty clear that it is tilted towards maintaining the status quo. And I think because of that, we are missing a huge opportunity to redirect our economy in a way that we're just not able to, because we're not looking at this opportunity. So between Metra, Amtrak, NICD, and the possibility of having other operators, we have an advantage over cities like Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, even LA, that just simply don't have that quality of service. But that system is out of date. It needs to be modernized. It's not frequent enough. And we have an issue of the market for those services has changed dramatically. And we should be investing heavily in modernizing those systems so that we can take advantage of this opportunity to move people in different ways. That means frequent service throughout the day. It means new modern train sets that are less expensive to operate. It means tying closely in with the transit networks, CTA buses with Metro Electric on the south side, for example. It means preparing for having much more frequent service on Amtrak coming from other cities into the region. And it's very disappointing that this opportunity to rethink our railroad network, deal with the challenges that we have at the same time, and take advantage of new pots of money that haven't been available before, the region is just not prepared to take advantage of this. And I would hope that this committee would look at ways that we could change the process in order to take advantage of these opportunities.
Thanks for taking the time to share that with the committee and speak that into the record. All right, do we have any more public comment, Kama or Mary?
Not seeing any.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on. Our next meeting will be June 3rd, 2022. So we will look forward to seeing all of you then. And with that, I will take a motion for adjournment. Leah, thank you. And the second?
Second DuPage.
Great, thanks, Chris. Let's go ahead and take a voice vote to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned.